The listing said finished basement, separate entrance, utilities included, and at $640 a month in a suburb where one-bedrooms were pushing $1,200. I didn't ask many questions. The Holloways were a pleasant couple, mid-50s, maybe. Dennis wore fleece vests and kept the gutters clean. Mara had the kind of smile that arrived a half-second too late, like she was translating something before she produced it. They showed me the unit on a Saturday afternoon in October, when the light came through the egress windows at a low, flattering angle and made the drop ceiling look almost intentional. The separate entrance was on the north side of the house, a steel door at the bottom of 4 concrete steps. With a keypad lock Dennis programmed himself. The unit had a small kitchen, a bathroom with a stand-up shower, a main room I used as both living and sleeping space, and a finished laundry alcove I shared with the Holloways, accessible through an interior door that locked on my side. He showed me the deadbolt demonstratively, throwing it twice with a meaningful nod, the way people do when they want credit for something that is only barely a courtesy. I moved in the 1st of November. The noises started in the 2nd week, which I attributed to the house settling into winter. A Midwest house in November sounds like a ship, groans traveling the length of the frame, pops from the ductwork, the furnace cycling on with a thud that rattled the light fixture above my kitchen table. Normal sounds. I'd grown up in old houses, and I knew their language. But there was a second category of sound I couldn't so easily name. It came from inside the eastern wall, the wall that ran along the base of the main staircase above. Not knocking. Closer to a shifting weight, a slow creak, the sound of pressure being redistributed. It happened most evenings between 9 and 10. I told myself it was the staircase above, the Holloways heading to bed. But the sound was lateral, not vertical. It moved along the wall, paused, moved again. I mentioned it to Dennis one morning when I met him at the mailbox. "Old house," he said, and smiled at the middle distance, and went inside. The thermostat was upstairs, which I had known going in. What I hadn't fully understood was how comprehensively that single fact would shape my life in the unit. The temperature was kept at 64 degrees from roughly 9 at night until 7 in the morning, and there was nothing I could do about it but run the space heater I bought at Target and add $40 to my electric bill. When I mentioned feeling cold, Mara nodded sympathetically and said she'd always found the basement perfectly cozy when she used it as a craft room. "You used to be down here a lot?" I asked. "Oh, we know it very well," she said. In January, the first began noticing the small displacements. I am not by nature a suspicious person. I mention this because I understand how what follows will read. But I am also a person who places objects deliberately, a habit from childhood. My phone charger always on the left side of the nightstand. My keys on the 3rd hook, not the 1st or 2nd. The dish soap to the right of the faucet, not the left. In January, these things began appearing in the wrong positions. Not dramatically, not ransacked. Just slightly rotated, or swapped, or moved by a few inches. The dish soap to the left. The keys on the 1st hook. Twice I found the interior laundry door unlocked, though I had no memory of leaving it that way. I started testing it before bed, pulling on it with 2 deliberate tugs, logging it in my phone. Locked January 14th. Locked January 15th, unlocked January 16th. no memory of entering. I examined the lock. It was an old interior privacy bolt, the kind designed more for the suggestion of separation than for genuine security. They knew things they shouldn't have known. In February, Dennis mentioned, entirely unprompted, while I was loading laundry, that I seemed to be sleeping better lately. I hadn't spoken to him about sleep. In March, Mara asked if I'd found a new doctor for my knee, which I had that week, but which I had mentioned to no one in my life in the suburb. My knee bothered me only at night. I had discussed it once in my unit on a phone call with my sister. I asked, carefully, how she knew about my knee. She looked at me with a slightly delayed smile and said I'd mentioned it once, probably. She couldn't remember exactly. Wasn't my sister a physical therapist? My sister is an accountant. I let it go. These are the calculations you make when you're paying $640 a month. I began conducting an experiment in March. Small, low-stakes things I said aloud in the unit alone, and then waited to see surface. I spoke to my reflection about the leaky shower fixture. Dennis replaced the fixture the next morning without my submitting a request. I said in the kitchen, making dinner for no one, that I'd been thinking about canceling my internet subscription. 3 days later, Mara mentioned casually that she hoped I wouldn't, that they'd noticed I worked from home quite a bit. Noticed. I stood at the egress windows sometimes and watched the street and thought about the architecture of the place, the ductwork especially, which fed from the furnace room on my end into the ceiling, and then up through the floors of the main house. A long, shared respiratory system. I thought about how sound behaves inside a duct, how a voice, low and conversational, might travel upward through sheet metal, might be caught and redistributed in ways the original speaker never intended. I told myself that's all it was. That's all it had to be. I moved out in April, a month before my lease ended. I told the Holloways I'd found something closer to work, which was true, and Dennis helped me carry the heavier boxes up the concrete steps and set them by my car without being asked, knowing as he somehow always did that I would need the help. "You were a wonderful tenant," Mara said from the top of the steps, hugging herself against the early spring cold. "We so enjoyed having you here." She said having you here with a warmth I couldn't quite account for, the warmth of someone reflecting on an experience that had given them a great deal of quiet, uninterrupted pleasure, the way you might remember a favorite television program, or a good long book you'd read in a comfortable chair, pressing close to every page. It was only later, pulling onto the highway with my car full of boxes, that it occurred to me she'd said enjoyed. Past tense, already in the rear view, as though she had known, before I did, that I was leaving, as though in some sense she had watched me decide. The fuel light had been on for 20 minutes before the sign appeared. I almost missed it, a green rectangle punching out of the dark at the edge of my high beams, reflective letters reading gas food to me, with a smaller placard beneath it that said last services 84 miles. I didn't know what was behind me anymore. I'd been driving since Missoula on a route my phone had suggested as a time saver, a 2-lane that ran southeast through a corridor of high desert scrub before eventually rejoining the interstate somewhere in Idaho. The phone had lost signal an hour back. I was navigating by the dotted yellow center line and the faith that roads go somewhere. The station was called Ranchers in tall red letters mounted on a pole, high enough to be seen from a distance that no longer made sense for a station this small. The lot was lit the way these places always are, fluorescent overheads beneath the canopy, throwing everything into a flat, shadowless white that makes the surrounding dark feel absolute by contrast. 2 pumps. A low building with a window full of lottery placard displays and a handwritten sign that said, "Open 24 HRS. A single car parked along the side of the building, not at the pumps, nose into the wall as though it had been tucked away. I pulled up to the nearest pump and got out. The cold surprised me. I was at elevation, and it was late September, and the air had a dry, mineral edge, the kind that comes off high desert at night and smells faintly of sage and something older. The fluorescence buzzed. There was a security camera mounted on the underside of the canopy, one of the older dome-style units, its dark hemisphere pointed down at the pump island. I noticed it the way you notice these things, briefly, reassuringly. Evidence of infrastructure, evidence of normal. The pump asked for zip code authorization, declined my card twice, then accepted it on the 3rd attempt. While the tank filled, I looked at the car parked against the building. Montana plates. A beige 4-door, late 90s probably, the kind of car that had been the color of compromise since it rolled off the lot. No visible damage, no bumper stickers, nothing distinguishing. The engine had been off long enough that there was no heat shimmer above the hood. I watched it the way you watch parked cars at night when you're alone, not with fear. Exactly, but with the particular alertness of a person who has done a lot of solo driving and knows that the world outside the car is not the same world as inside it. The pump clicked. I replaced the nozzle and went inside to use the bathroom. The interior was small, organized around a central island of snacks and motor oil and camping supplies, still in their original 1990s packaging. The lighting inside was worse than outside. Older tubes, one of them cycling faintly, strobing at a frequency too slow to be imperceptible. The bathroom key was attached to a wooden block the size of a spatula, hung on a nail beside the register. The employee behind the counter was a man I would estimate at anywhere between 45 and 60. He was thick through the shoulders, wearing a canvas work shirt with no name tag, and he was reading a newspaper with the focused inattention of someone performing reading rather than doing it. He didn't look up when I came in. "Bathroom key," I said. He lifted it off the nail and set it on the counter without looking up. The bathroom was around the side of the building. Outside, a metal door with a lock that stuck and required lifting the handle while turning the key simultaneously. Inside, a single bulb on a pull string, a toilet, a sink, a small mirrored cabinet above the sink, with a crack running from the upper left hinge down through the center of the glass. The kind of bathroom that has smelled like concrete and industrial soap since before you were born. I looked at myself in the cracked mirror for longer than I meant to. When I came back around the front of the building, I paused at the corner. The beige car was still there. I could see now that there was someone in the driver's seat, motionless, not looking at a phone, no screen glow, no blue light, just sitting, facing the wall. I went back inside and returned the key. "Long drive?" the man said. He was still looking at his newspaper. "Missoula. Headed to Twin Falls." He nodded as though this confirmed something. "You'll want to stay on 24 past the junction. Don't take the fork." I looked at him. "What fork?" You'll see a fork about 11 miles south. Take the right. Left takes you up." He turned a page. Nothing up there. I thanked him, bought a coffee from the machine near the door, and left. I found the fork at what my odometer measured as 11.5 miles. The right branch continued south through flat scrubland. The left rose at a grade into dark hills with no lights visible anywhere along it. I took the right branch. I didn't think about it. It was only around 40 minutes later when the two-lane finally merged onto a lit interchange and I found signal again and pulled up my GPS to get proper bearings that I noticed the receipt. I'd tucked it in the Q folder the way I always do, automatic, absent, and the coffee machine had printed one without me requesting it. I pick up receipts reflexively. It's nothing. The timestamp read 11:47 p.m. I looked at the clock on my dash. It read 11:52 p.m. I'd spent at least 20 minutes at the station. The pump, the bathroom, the walk around the building, the transaction inside. Minimum 20 minutes. 25 more likely. I had pulled in sometime around 11:20, maybe 11:15. A receipt time-stamped 11:47 meant I'd left the counter at 11:47, which meant I'd arrived sometime before 11:30. I sat with that for a while, letting the interstate traffic blur past, watching the mile markers tick upward. There was an explanation. Receipt machines keep bad time. I'd misread my dashboard clock in the dark. 20 minutes becomes 15 when your attention is split. These are the small imprecisions of tired, solitary travel. Nothing more. I kept driving. But here's what I keep returning to weeks later in the flat and accountable light of an ordinary room. I've looked several times now for ranchers on the two-lane I drove that night. I've run satellite views up and down the route. I've searched the road name against business registries for 2 counties. I've found one result, a defunct listing, no website, no reviews, no photos, marked permanently closed with no closing date given. I've told myself the database is just outdated. These rural stations shutter and reopen under cash arrangements that never touch official records. It's not unusual. Nothing about this is unusual. What I have not let myself think about for very long, what I bring to the edge of and then step back from, is the beige car. Specifically, when I came back around the front of the building and looked at it, the person inside was facing the wall and not moving. Sitting in a parked car facing a wall at midnight with no phone, no light, no apparent reason. The Montana plate I saw as I walked past was 3-something-something-T-R. I'm reasonably confident of the T and the R. I remember the beige, the year range, the nose-in angle. In the weeks since, I've thought about that car in the idle, compulsive way you think about things that have no resolution. And I keep arriving at the same small detail that I cannot explain away the way I've explained away the others. When I first pulled in, I looked at that car and noted that the engine had been off long enough that there was no heat shimmer above the hood. It was 38 degrees that night. An engine off long enough to cool completely and 38 degrees isn't off for 20 minutes. It isn't off for an hour. I don't know who was sitting in it. I don't know how long they'd been there, or whether the person inside was waiting for something, or whether waiting is even the right word for what a person is doing when they sit motionless in a cold car at midnight facing a wall in a place with no reason to be. I don't know. I just know the man behind the counter didn't ask me where I was coming from. He asked where I was headed. And when I told him, he already knew which road would take me there and which one went somewhere else, somewhere he described with a particular plainness, the plainness of a man who had no need to make the warning dramatic. Nothing up there, as if he'd needed for some reason to make sure I stayed on the road I was on, as if he'd had some interest in where I arrived. Environment Canada issued the advisory on a Sunday evening, the kind of bulletin that uses words like significant accumulation and travel not recommended, and that most people in Kenora read the way you read the fine print on a lease, aware of it, not truly absorbing it. I bought bread and 2 bottles of wine and a rotisserie chicken on my way home from work that afternoon, which turned out to be more prescient than I intended, because by Monday morning there were 40 centimeters on the ground, and the street below my window had become a white corridor between white walls, and nothing was moving in it. I live on the 3rd floor of a 6-story building on Matheson Street, Lakeview Terrace, which has no view of the lake. 32 units, underground parking, a superintendent named Gerald who kept his office hours posted on a laminated card in the lobby and observed them with the selectivity of a man who had arranged his life to be as difficult to reach as possible. The building is from the late 70s, brick exterior, corridors that always smell faintly of cooked onions and carpet cleaner, radiators that knock and spit. It is not a remarkable building. For 3 years it had been the kind of place you stopped noticing. The storm changed the quality of things. By Tuesday, the snow was mid-thigh at street level and still falling. The city's plows had made 2 passes on the main roads and given up on the side streets entirely. My building's maintenance contractor, not Gerald, some separate company Gerald had mentioned once with the vagueness of a man who preferred you not to contact them directly, had cleared the front walk on Monday and not returned. The drift against the lobby entrance was level with the door handle by Tuesday afternoon. I know this because I went down to check the mail, found nothing, and stood in the lobby for a moment watching the snow pile against the glass. The lobby has a security panel by the door, a black rectangle with a camera feed cycling through the parquet entrance, the rear exit, and the lobby itself, 3 views rotating every 8 seconds. I'd walked past that panel 1,000 times without stopping to watch it. I watched it for a minute or 2, the way idleness during a storm will redirect your attention to things you've been ignoring. The rear exit feed was partially obscured. Ice on the exterior camera lens, most likely, or condensation. The image had a white smear across its upper third that made it difficult to see the top of the door frame and the small covered alcove above the steps. The rest of the image was clear. Just the gray door, the painted cinder block, the yellow safety stripe on the step edge. I went back upstairs and opened the wine. The footprints were there Wednesday morning. My apartment faces the rear of the building, and my bedroom window looks down onto the back lot, a narrow strip of asphalt between the building and a chain-link fence, used mostly for dumpsters and bike storage. By Wednesday morning, that strip had accumulated perhaps 60 centimeters of undisturbed snow, smooth and complete as a made bed, and running along it, parallel to the building, close to the wall, was a single set of footprints. They came from the direction of the rear exit and traveled the length of the building before disappearing at the far end. where the lot meets the fence at a corner. I stood at my window for a long time trying to determine the direction of travel. With a single set, it's difficult. The toe and heel compression looked similar in deep snow, but the depth of the prints was consistent and they didn't wander. Purposeful. Someone who knew where they were going or knew where they'd been. There were no returning prints. I told myself maintenance. Someone from the contractor company had come around to check the rear exit, had cut through the lot on foot rather than coming up the front. This is the explanation a reasonable person gives a set of footprints in the snow before they've had coffee. I made coffee, and the explanation held until I looked at the prints again and noticed that they ran close to the building, close enough that whoever made them would have been pressed almost to the brick wall. Walking that way in deep snow isn't practical. It's something you do when you don't want to be seen from above. I knocked on the door of 3C that afternoon because I'd met the woman who lived there, Margaret, 60 or so, retired school teacher, the kind of person who slides sympathy cards under neighbors' doors when she hears bad news through walls. And I thought she might have seen something from her window, which faced the same direction as mine. She answered on the third knock in a housecoat she didn't seem conscious of wearing, and she had the specific look of someone I'd interrupted in the middle of a thought they were having trouble locating. I was wondering if you saw anyone in the back lot this morning, I said. She looked at me for a moment, not with confusion, but with something more like recalibration. The back lot, she repeated. There are footprints in the snow, running along the building. I thought maybe maintenance came around. Gerald doesn't come Wednesdays, she said. And then, after a pause that had slightly too much content in it, I'm sure it's fine. It was a strange response. Not I'm sure it was maintenance, not I didn't notice anything, both of which would have been natural. I'm sure it's fine is what you say to a child who has noticed, a thing you'd prefer they hadn't. I smiled and thanked her, and she closed the door before I'd finished, turning away. I called Gerald's line Wednesday evening. He answered, which surprised me. I described the footprints. I mentioned the rear camera being obscured. I asked whether anyone from maintenance had been through the lot. The lot doesn't get serviced until the snow stops, he said. That's in your lease. I'm not asking about snow removal, I said. I'm asking whether anyone was back there. A pause. Could have been a tenant cutting through. From where? The lot ends at a fence. Another pause of a slightly different quality. I'll look into it, he said, and I could hear in his voice the specific timbre of a man arranging to do nothing. The camera issue is probably ice. It's been doing that in cold years. This building has had cold years before. I'll log the call, he said. Thursday, the knocking started. Twice. Once at around 2 in the afternoon, once closer to 9 at night. 3 knocks each time, measured, not urgent. The first time I answered immediately and found the corridor empty in both directions. The overhead fluorescent at the far end stuttering as it sometimes did in cold weather. I stepped out and looked and listened and heard nothing but the radiator in the hallway and the low, structural moan of the building in the wind. The second time I waited before opening the door, counted to 15, then opened it. Empty corridor, flickering light, the smell of cooked onions and carpet cleaner. I checked the stairwell at the end of the hall. The door was closed. The small square window in it showed only the gray concrete of the landing and the iron railing, and the landing was empty, and there was no sound of footsteps descending. I stood in the doorway of my apartment for a long time, listening to the building. Buildings are not quiet. They breathe and they settle, and they transmit sound in ways that bear no relationship to architecture. A voice on the 6th floor arrives in the 2nd as a vibration with no words. A television on the 4th becomes a low pulse in the 3rd. I know the sounds of my building the way you know the sounds of a body you've been sleeping next to for years. I knew which of what I was hearing was normal. Most of it was normal. The power went out Friday at 3 in the morning and came back in 40 seconds, which is long enough to reset every clock in an apartment and wake you from a dead sleep in a darkness so complete it takes several seconds to remember where you are. I lay in the recovered dark for a long time, listening to the building re-establish itself, the refrigerator cycling back on, the radiator resuming its language, the elevator at the end of the hall descending to a floor with a mechanical sigh, the elevator descending at 3 in the morning. During a storm that had emptied the building of visitors and deliveries and any ordinary reason to be moving between floors, I looked at my phone. No new messages, no missed calls. I got up and stood at the bedroom window and looked at the back lot. The original footprints were buried under 2 days of additional snowfall, visible only as shallow depressions if you knew where to look. There was a light on in 3C, Margaret's window, directly across the building's rear corner from mine, glowing amber behind her curtain at 3:15 in the morning. She could have been a bad sleeper. She could have gotten up for water. There were 12 ordinary explanations. I watched the light for a while. It didn't move or change. It was simply on, steady, in a window that was on the building's far side from any street, in the middle of a week when no one went anywhere and nothing arrived, and the snow filled every space it found. The storm broke Saturday. The city began its recovery in layers, plows first, then the sand trucks, then the people emerging from buildings and digging out their cars with the specific mutual goodwill that a common inconvenience briefly produces. Gerald's contractor came and cleared the walks in the lot, erasing everything. By Sunday, you would not have known anything had happened. I've thought since about the rear exit, about the camera with its obscured lens, and the question I didn't think to ask Gerald, not did anyone come through, but a simpler question about the rear entrance's access log. Modern key fob systems record every entry. Gerald would have that data. If the building system generated it, I didn't ask. I'm not sure why I didn't ask. I've thought about Margaret saying I'm sure it's fine without asking me what, specifically, I was worried about. I've thought about the elevator at 3 in the morning, and I've thought more than any of it about a detail in my lease that I read when I signed and haven't looked at since. Standard language, 2 paragraphs under the section on building access and maintenance. It grants management and their designated agents the right to enter common areas and perform inspections of the building systems at any time without notice, as required for the safety and upkeep of the property. Common areas includes, by the lease's own definition, all corridors, stairwells, utility spaces, and the parking and exterior access infrastructure of the building. There is no clause specifying that you will be told who the designated agents are, how many there are, or when they were last inside. Only that they are permitted to be